This is a super simple process that is, yes, to be totally clear, and we all agree, a bit more invasive than anything we have right now, aka nothing, which is what we have right now, and it's certainly needed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into episode number 4 of the Bot Lobby podcast. I'm Grandmaster Gojj, one of your hosts today, joined by the wonderful, the only Katie Bedford. Katie, how are you doing today? I am so excited to jump into everything we've got going today.
I am wonderful, and I think one of my favorite things as we're in the infancy of this podcast is how excited I get for every episode to come around on these Wednesdays. So we've got our first episode of Double Guests, and Gojj, I'm really excited. I think there's going to be a lot of meaty discussion to be had.
Yeah, before we jump into it, I've got to say, really exciting news, especially if you're listening to it in this way. We have officially launched our audio platforms. We are live on Spotify, we're live on the Google Play Store, we're live in Android Store, we're on iTunes, we're all over the place. Everywhere you would like to find your podcast. Podbean, I think, is another one. You can listen to it via audio version only, which I know a lot of people were suggesting and requesting because they'd like to listen to it on their drive to work and things like that. So feel free to listen to it on the audio platforms. Of course, we do have a YouTube channel where all of our VOD-based content will live, and then we are live every single Wednesday, twitch.tv/Grandmaster Gojj. But that's what we have right now. That's the update. We got to jump straight into the action, Katie, because we have a lot to get through today. I want to start. We had a couple events that have happened between this last week or so that it's been since our last episode. And before we bring on our first guest, I know we wanted to very quickly talk about one of those events, specifically the event that you and I casted together, which was the 15K Charlie Intel Customs event.
Yeah, so that event just recently happened, and it was MSage, Wiz, and Oki who came out on top in that trio. TBE took second place, and Breadman, Jowo, and FIFA took third. Unfortunately, within the event, there was a number of glitches that were occurring, whether it was the redeploy glitch on the zip line or crates, loadout crates falling into the ground, various things like that that were just causing some consternation for players. But within that as well, there were accusations from Tommy. He was accusing a member of MSage's team of potentially stream sniping. Allegedly, Wiz might have opened someone's stream. I think nothing ever really came of that. But it is another instance among many in these competitive Warzone tournaments of accusations at varying degrees of validity being levied against people. And that's one of the reasons that we're having on some of the people we are today to kind of be able to talk about potential solutions for that.
Exactly. It's a great lead into our first guest. And although there are always issues in Warzone tournaments, and there will always be issues in esports events in general, just because of the nature of online events and tech things that you can or can't do, we are bringing on a very special guest that I want to intro, and then we're going to bring him straight into the call to get started because, well, our title is very leading. We're talking about a new anti-cheat protocol. This is an anti-cheat protocol that is specifically built for Warzone tournaments to help us clean up the scene and start taking away some of this gray area that we're having to deal with and really open up the stage. And the way I think about it is open up the stage for some of these up and coming players to prove that they are legit so they can continue to have some success or otherwise, of course. So we're going to bring on FoVeS FPS. If you don't know FoVeS, they are going to explain a lot more about what they do, but FoVeS in particular started a company for PC optimizations to help you get all the FPS things that you need on Warzone to enable to succeed. But alongside that, they have done a lot of different things on the tech side behind the scenes, including things like this new anti-cheat protocol that they're going to walk us through. So welcome in, FoVeS. Let's drag him into the Discord call. It should be in here now. And let's swing over. I've got a picture up on screen. FoVeS, can you hear us? Make sure you unmute in both Discord as well as Twitter. We are super excited to have you on today.
I appreciate you guys for having me. I can hear you guys loud and clear.
Love that. I love that. Well, FoVeS, first of all, I gave a little bit of intro, but I think you can only intro yourself the best. And I'd love to just give you a second to talk about, before we get into the anti-cheat protocol that you and I have had lengthy discussions about. I'd love for you to kind of intro who you are and how you're kind of involved in the Call of Duty scene. I know a lot of people know you, but for those that don't, feel free to give a little intro.
Yeah, 100%. Again, thank you, Gojj and Katie, for having me. Many know of me as FoVeS in the community, the founder of FoVeS for Second. And for kind of those that don't know about us, like Gojj was saying, we do PC optimizations. I guess this phrase is kind of thrown around a lot, PC optimizations, which are kind of correlated with, getting the most performance. And it's kind of thrown around a lot in the Warzone scene because it's like, I need to get my PC optimized so I can get the best performance for Warzone. But really what it is it's a service for streamers, gamers, and content creators to make sure that they're getting like a tailored tech setup for what their goals are, and then kind of making sure that their system or setup is running optimally. Sometimes this includes like consultations for making sure that you're getting the best PC parts to buy, whether it's getting a better processor or graphics card, services like overclocking, which a lot of the Warzone streamers and content creators kind of want because they want to get the most performance out of their game. And then we also kind of help with things like single and dual PC setups, whether it's related with audio or OBS and getting those things running optimally. What was that?
Audio is very, very scary.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we need people like FoVeS. So I have a question for you, FoVeS. Sure. So you started this as PC optimization and all of the things that come into that. What inspired or led you down the road to start working on something like an anti-cheat protocol? How did that tie into starting with something like PC optimization?
Yeah, so well, I come from a tech background. My day-to-day job, I'm in the U.S. Air Force, and so one of the biggest things that I do for the Air Force or for the military is cybersecurity. And I have a passion for the hacking world, in terms of whether it's either hacking systems or being the deterrent for it. And so with kind of being in the space of the Call of Duty scene and then also kind of having this tech background, and I'm very close with a lot of the content creators and streamers and quote unquote wager kids. A lot of them come and vent to me about, they're like, oh, can you do this PC check? And oh, can you do this and that? And I'm like, yeah, we can. But, now I wanted to kind of come up with something that's maybe more, we could solidify something that would be something that tournament organizers can use and tournaments could use so that it's more streamlined and it's more robust. And that's kind of how we came up with this FoVeS anti-cheat protocol.
Amazing. Yeah, I know you and I have talked a lot off stream about how this could be utilized, and I want to give us some time to break down the actual process itself, because there has been a lot of confusion and issues in the Warzone scene with hacking, of course, but also what can prevent hacking, what can't prevent hacking, and what are ways that we could hopefully clean up the scene, at least to some degree. And one of the things that you and I talked about was, hey, how do we start with the tournament organizers? There are so many tournaments happening, $1.5+ million in Caldera since Caldera has dropped. And what would it look like to start implementing a very simple process that these players can implement, or the admins can implement for the players, so that there's a less likelihood that these players are going to be cheating inside of it. So what I'd love for you to do is just kind of walk through, one, what you actually do, right? Like with this protocol, what programs are you implementing currently that you have either built or that you are, using that are third-party programs, and how do they kind of operate together? And if there's opportunities for us to jump in and ask some questions on those, then we will.
Yeah, for sure. So the anti-cheat protocol is just kind of it's just a streamlined process of using third-party applications, and these applications we've kind of tested, the two applications being Moss and FaceIt. So a little bit of a background on both of them. Moss is a system logger. It's primarily been used in the Counter-Strike or it used to be primarily used in the Counter-Strike scene before things like FaceIt came along and ESEA anti-cheat. And it's been a very popular anti-cheat also in Rainbow Six Siege, in which the ESL kind of implemented their own anti-cheat and then also used Moss along with it as a mandatory tool for all their competitive matches. And so the Moss is the part where it's a system logger and it captures all the running processes that are running on your PC at the time. It stands for monitor system status, and it's still being actively developed on by the creator and supports many titles. And the one cool thing about Moss, the biggest takeaway, is that it generates an encrypted log file, and Moss also has a built-in tool to kind of verify the integrity of said encrypted log file, so to ensure that it's not been tampered with. So,
Got it.
and then the secondary tool that we would use along with that is FaceIt, which we all know about. It's an actively, and just a little background about it, it's an actively maintained anti-cheat. It's been used for CSGO and a couple of other titles. It's been around for a few years as well, and it's also actively developed and updated by the FaceIt team. And the thing about FaceIt is that overall it protects the overall PC by preventing cheats from being injected. And there are various ways of developing cheats, and don't want to go too much into the nitty gritty
Sure.
about how cheats are developed, but essentially, a big primary way of that cheats are developed are their injectables, and FaceIt is very good at deterring injectable cheats, which are primarily how Warzone cheats are developed, which are cheats that need to be ran prior to Warzone being launched. And so
Sure.
this kind of hybrid approach of using a system logger and a anti-injectable cheat application is kind of the strength of the protocol, like, because there are multiple lines of defense, so that a cheat provider would kind of have to circumvent essentially multiple tools in order for it to work.
Yeah, and I want to stop you there, because if everybody in chat that are listening, or the audio listeners, are like Katie and I, you're probably like, what in the world did he just say, right? If you're tech savvy, you're like, oh, this all makes sense, and I think this is a great process. So let's back it up a little bit, and let's talk about first these two applications. Now, I know you guys created something else to add on to this that we'll go into in a little bit. Let's back up to Moss for a second, right? And say, hey, what does it mean to have a systems logger or a process logger, and why would that be important for things like a Warzone tournament?
Yeah, so to put it in layman's terms, essentially all it's doing is kind of like it's replicating what people would do in terms of people are like, oh, open up your task manager X competitor so that we can see if you have a cheat running. Well, essentially this is just keeping track of all the running processes or running applications, so that if somebody was to run a cheat application, we would be able to see the history of running applications from the beginning of, like, so essentially the protocol, the way we have it set up is that you would essentially start your stream, run Moss, run FaceIt, and then launch your game. And we kind of outlined this with Ebates, who was a competitor you guys actually just had on your last podcast. And we kind of we made a tweet and a video about it, outlining the process. It's super easy, but yeah, essentially Moss is just kind of it creates like a log file, or you could just think of it as just a text file that has a bunch of applications listed that are running at the time of when you boot up your PC or you boot up your stream, all the way till the end of like the tournament, for example.
Got it. So it would track everything that you've opened. Since once you start Moss, it'll track everything you open from then on out and create a file that lets you look back and say, hey, this was the order that they opened these applications.
Yes, exactly.
So talk to me, you've mentioned the file is encrypted, right? And I'm going to talk about all of this in like the most simplistic terms possible. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, because some of these players might understand what we're talking about. A lot of them probably don't, nor do they care to understand. So when it comes to something like that encrypted file you're talking about, why is that important within this process?
Yeah, so because if we want to make sure, well, Moss kind of did a great job, or the developers at Moss did a great job in doing that, because so Moss, the way that they kind of do it is they have their own process of being able to vet if somebody was cheating or not. So you would go into their forums. The Moss developers have a forum where tournament organizers would submit like the file, and they can essentially get it reviewed. And that leads into the thing that we're going to talk about later, which is kind of like our script tool that we kind of created to help create a review of that log file. But it's important for it to essentially be encrypted, because we want to make sure nobody tampers with the history of like when they're opening the files or anything like that.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so Moss, it tracks everything that you open it, in what order you open it. And then let's talk about FaceIt for a moment. Now, some of this will have to kind of just say, hey, this is what we think is going on with FaceIt, or allegedly, or what have you, because we know, FoVeS, you and I even talked about this, the big question mark around FaceIt is whether or not it, quote unquote, works for Warzone. There's a very simple answer to whether or not it does. They did post a very specific, tangible picture of a graphic that says, hey, this does not cover Warzone. We have not built FaceIt for Warzone. But I want to have a moment here to talk about FaceIt, what it actually does. You said it prevents injection of cheats. Can you walk through, maybe not like super specifically, but walk through why it actually would work for Warzone, at least the way we are using it?
Yeah, so we believe that FaceIt works because we've actually tested the way that the anti-cheat provider FaceIt kind of works, or the application or its core engine works, is that essentially it just protects the PC from what we refer to as cheat injection. It's a kernel level driver, to get a little bit technical, kind of like Riot's anti-cheat as well, which is Vanguard for Valorant. And essentially that it runs at the pretty much at the startup of your PC. So any application that it detects, it will prevent it from, so long as it's launched prior to Warzone, it will essentially stop it from actually attaching to Warzone, which is how a majority of the cheats, or the public cheats, kind of work. Now, this is mostly in regards to, from our testing, we tested about 4 or 5 of the biggest public cheat providers, and and there are videos out there as well testing this as well, and it actually, FaceIt does stop it. But then we needed a second way to be able to make sure that we're tracking that players are actually not, or competitors are not, launching the cheat after Warzone is launched.
Sure. Yeah. So the big piece about FaceIt is, like, yes, it does cover multiple game titles, because its entire concept is not tied to a game specifically. It's more so tied to the around the idea of not letting a cheat inject, period. Right.
Correct.
Got it.
That is correct.
Got it. Okay. And then the big piece about FaceIt is making sure you boot it up in the correct order.
Yes.
Of before the game starts, so that it actually covers the game in question. And the way we track that is not taking people for their word or what we see on the stream. Instead, you utilize Moss to make sure FaceIt is opened in order of the way you want it, right?
You hit the nail on the head, or the coffin, or whatever. Yes.
Love it. Okay, so this is how we've got the first process, which is, hey, we've got Moss to cover our bases of when FaceIt is actually launched, so that it's done correctly and actually prevents cheating. So take us through this third part. And I know, Katie, this is something you and I talked a ton about, hey, this is super crucial at the end of what they've created to make tournament organizers' job easier, because one of the big question marks around this is when players do submit their files. Number one, how easy that is. We'll get to that in a second. But number two, can we even read that file and recognize if things were done correctly? So talk about what you guys actually created to help with this process.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Katie mentioned, like, more so about that log file and, the encryption, and to answer your question about, it's not exactly super readable, nor do we want tournament organizers already have enough on their plate. Mm-hmm. So what we did was created what we call our FoVeS tournament analysis tool, or script. And essentially this tool or script kind of takes the Moss log file, and all it's doing is it's verifying specific criteria that we cannot obviously publicize, to one, verify the integrity of the file, and that to essentially make sure that no suspicious processes were not run on the PC during the tournament. It's not the job of necessarily the tournament organizer to have to go through the file and look at a bunch of hex values and things like, and process values, and make a determination from that. We kind of just say, hey, we're creating kind of like a summary or report for the tournament organizer. I guess like an example, or something that would be analogous, would be like, we could just spit out a percentage chance that a person is cheating, and the data to back it up. Like, we would say, it would just show a little report that says 60% sus, and and it would have like the executables or applications that we're running to kind of back that up.
Sure.
We would actively maintain that script, and we would continue to update it based on our own testing and in collaboration with tournament organizers. And again, it's just another the biggest thing to take away from all this is just that it's just another point of data or point of reference for tournament organizers to use, because at the moment they just don't have anything besides looking at VODs. And I think that tournament organizers still need to do a whole holistic review of it. They need to go in the VOD. They need to review it with other people. They need to look at, like, slow it down the same way. But they also now will have something else to go off of, rather than just having a bunch of players going to their task manager and look at.
So what I'm understanding from this seems to be that, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is less of a relatively instant way for a TO to determine a cheating allegation, but more so an additional piece of the puzzle in kind of like that long form. So for example, we can bring up someone like Shifty, right? So if you get to the end of a tournament, is this something that a TO can turn around and use in the moment to make a determination, or is it more something that is going to have to be determined in the days after a tournament happens?
Ideally, from the way that we've kind of developed this, we would hope that we can accomplish it so that we can accomplish it so that it actually will be there as like an instant report.
Okay.
But for the most part, this is something not necessarily would take days of looking at, but it would be more so something post tournament to look at.
Sure.
Okay, and then really quickly as well, Gojj, I think you might have a question, but if you could, so do you have the kind of step-by-step of what implementation would look like on, say, a mock tournament from start to finish, if you will, for these players? So if a tournament was implementing this for the first time, what are kind of those steps for players? How would everything flow within a tournament?
Yeah, so we actually were looking forward to working with like Twitter tournament organizers like Winterellas and Miss Know-It-All and Papa Hex. These are guys that are people that we've kind of spoken with and trying to implement it. But essentially, I guess we could break it up. It's kind of like a twofold question. So for participants, so prior to the tournament, all the participants would essentially get like a Google Drive link with the latest version of Face It and Moz, which would be like just zipped up in a file that you would just put on your essentially install on your PC. You would start your stream, run Moss, run Face It, and then the game. It's something that takes about 1 to 2 minutes to do in its entirety. And we like I said, we had created a video with Ebates detailing the instructions. And then essentially, if these instructions aren't followed, then essentially it's just another red flag for a tournament organizer to utilize. And then for tournament organizers, all they really need to do is send out a Google Drive link to all the and the instructions to all the participants. And they also need to share a form link where the players will actually submit their Moss log files. Mm-hmm. And essentially the Moss log files can be submitted whenever the tournament organizer requests it, because the way that Moss works is that you can actually stop the execution of Moss, and then it'll generate the log file, and then you can push it right then and there per the request of a tournament organizer. So it doesn't necessarily have to wait all the way till the end of the tournament. And then tournament organizer will reach out to the FoVeS team, and then we'll run out the script and generate the results, which is submitted to the tournament organizer for final review.
Got it. So the big piece of this concept too that I want to kind of like back up on and harp on is that this is a super simple process that is, yes, to be totally clear, and we all agree, a bit more invasive than anything we have right now, aka nothing, which is what we have right now, and it's certainly needed, right? Like we talk about this all the time in Twitter tournaments, etc. People's careers being demolished because of certain accusations, etc. And so, hey, what are ways that we can all come together as a tournament community and say, hey, Activision is still continuing to put a lot of money into this tournament scene. Let's all try to do this in a fair and competitive manner. And so when we talk about the process and how easy it is for players, we can also mention, you said the analysis report will spit out a report saying, hey, there's like 60% sus or whatever you want to say with that report. The big piece of that, based on what you and I had talked about, FoVeS, was when that percentage comes in, that will then dictate whether or not we need to do a deeper dive and a deeper check into that player, correct?
Correct. Yes. Okay. Yeah. This is just a very it's just like I said. It's just a kind of it's just kind of a general it essentially, it's not supposed to be something that will 100% determine whether or not they are cheating or not, because at the end of the day, it no anti-cheat is perfect, and this is just another reference point for a tournament organizer to be able to say, okay, look, they're running something in the background that we need to do a deeper dive on.
Yeah,
But just to clarify, so if you're saying they are running something and we need to do a deeper dive, does the log file not say what that thing is?
Yes, it will. It will.
Okay, so I guess, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just giving an example, like if they are running, like for example, a big one that's thrown out is like engineowning.exe, it will display that. So
it'll flag the sus files.
Yes.
Right, because I guess my question of that was within kind of in those moment situations where, say, a team is disputing a win and accusing someone. Is it going to be possible for someone like Mazida, for example, to be able to look at that and within that file, if there was something running per se, like say they see that name and they know there's a cheat running, okay, but like this is open and shut? Because one of the issues right now, as we said, is we don't really have a system for competitive Warzone at all in terms of cheating. A lot of it's hearsay, a lot of it's clips that could be sus but maybe can be explained away. So in a situation like this, I think a lot of people are looking for something that you can say this can provide more of a nail in the coffin in situations, or be like, no, there was nothing running, this person's fine. Can it do that?
Yes, it can. It can definitely be the nail in the coffin. But again, like at the end of the day, our goal here at, with the team and at FoVeS for second is to build something that just kind of gives more insight to the tournament organizer to make the best judgment call, whether they see engine owning and the competitor comes back and says that, oh, I just renamed a file to that, and and the tournament organizer says, okay, well, this guy's obviously the claim just doesn't make sense, then they can deem them a cheater or not, or them using a cheat application is up to the tournament organizer. We're just providing more support or more insight for the tournament organizer to make that final decision.
And the other thing that you had talked about is running FaceIt along the way. This is not just a process logger. It is a process logger to determine whether or not FaceIt was run correctly, which does prevent cheat injection. So it's a multi-step process that covers a lot more bases than we currently have. I really, really like this idea. And you mentioned how easy it was for players. Based on all of our conversations, it's as simple as download, immediately hit the go button, the start button. That's all you have to do. Do it in the correct order. At the end, you hit end and it'll spit out the file, and you just drag that into like a Google form drop or into the Discord. Boom, you're done. It's super simple. And Katie and I were laughing about this before we got started today, of like, players sometimes have a hard time even reading rules. So adding
extremely lazy. Let's just be extremely lazy.
Sure. So adding anything into the mix is always going to be difficult. But with how easy this is, once tournament organizers start getting used to running this and players start getting used to running it, it becomes an extremely simple process that is second nature. And I think the only big concerns would be making sure the tournament organizers are on the same page with you guys, FoVeS, because what we don't want to happen, right, would be a tournament organizer getting that data back, that log file back, the analysis tool spit out and says, hey, there's a 50% chance this person is cheating or this person is sus, and the tournament organizer jumping the gun and saying, you're out, you're gone, you're 100% sus. This report says there's too much percentage chance, and go ahead and throws them out to the dogs, if you will, on Twitter. So what do you think the best course of action would be when you're working with the tournament organizers to actually start making decisions?
Yeah, so in those kind of situations, again, we would say that, again, they need to be as holistic as possible, not to only use this. They should also be doing whatever they've been kind of doing up until this point, whether it be a VOD review or conducting whether they go on the PC and actually look at things. I do think that tournament organizers do need to still be a little bit more holistic than just getting the results and just making a determination based off of that. Because that, at the end of the day, I think it's just another, like I said, it's just another point of reference for a tournament organizer.
It makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense. I mean, nothing is going to be perfect, but it definitely seems like something that could be deeply helpful here. And if you're going to implement something like this, everyone has to use it in these tournaments. It can't be cherry picked. I don't care who you are. If you're a ScummN, you have to be using it alongside in UnRationaL and a Huskers and whoever else from the top down in these tournaments. But FoVeS, what in your eyes are so you have this product, right? Moss, face it. What are the barriers to entry right now, if you will, for those next steps to actually getting something like this implemented with TOs?
The player's willingness to download it and not think that they lose aim assist, I guess.
I mean, in terms of the TOs, have you had pushback? Have you reached out to TOs at all about trying to do this?
I have, yeah, and almost all of them are like, yeah, let's do it. It just more so, I think it's just from a logistical perspective, it seems like it's a lot to them, but in all honesty, it's 2 links and a download that everybody has to kind of do. So it's very minimal barrier to entry. You just have to make sure that, I guess the biggest thing is that when said streamer is actually running this, that they actually show it on stream that they're running, and that would be the biggest barrier to entry. And just making sure that they're running it in the right steps, as you kind of mentioned, Katie, like even just getting people to kind of read the rules and make sure that they're not using knives or whatever, a car 98 or whatever, and in a tournament, and making sure that they're abiding by those rules. Sometimes they slip up on. So I can foresee some things like that coming up where, they run face it first and then Moss it second, and then they launch their game first. But I mean, we can only do our part and just be as clear and as explicit as possible. And if those aren't being run, or if they're not being, if people don't abide by that, well, then it only would raise a red flag, because we would be as clear as possible with that.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You've done a great job explaining it. If you guys are listening at home, Twitter, Twitch, or audio otherwise, feel free to send us questions on Twitter. We will feel free to answer those. I know FoVeS and I have talked a ton about, hey, how do we start implementing this? We want to start with tournament organizers. We want to start with the Twitter tournaments in particular, in the grassroots scene, because that's really where most of these players get their start. I mean, I'll even use an example of Oki, who wasn't old enough to start playing in some of the larger events, really grinded through the Twitter tournaments, made a name for himself, and now that he's old enough, is starting to tear up the big scene. And it will be helpful for all of these players that are trying to prove that they are legit to have something like this in place. Even if it's not a 100% certainty this will fix everything, this is much more data that we'll be able to give to tournament organizers to make informed decisions, rather than conjecture based off of clips or based off of information, or just hoping that these people make a mistake and pull up, cheats on their stream, which has happened multiple times. So, FoVeS, this is all fantastic. Super excited to talk more about this with you later, create more content around it, because I know one of the big things we want to do is make sure everyone's informed with exactly how this can work and why it is effective, while also convincing the public that it doesn't actually take away aim assist, because it doesn't touch the game at all. But
no, 100%.
Is there anything else you wanted to kind of like finish with before we close out this portion of the discussion?
I mean, yeah, I guess pretty much everything you guys said. I appreciate your guys' giving me the opportunity, Katie and Gojj, for letting me talk about this. Pretty much at the end of the day, like I said before, there's no anti-cheat is perfect, and kind of like highlighting at what you said, Gojj. Every game is kind of like striving to have a better cheat deterrent than kind of what they had before. A lot of people kind of slam Ricochet, but I think we've kind of forgotten the number of cheaters we had in Verdansk, and how dramatically less we see cheaters relatively in Calder.
Every game.
What was that?
Every map and every game, to your point, back in Verdansk was an endless barrage of cheaters. And I think people need to keep in mind, right, that when it comes to something like cheating in video games, people are always going to be innovating and finding ways to get around the countermeasures. Ricochet has done a lot to help. Yep. But I guess just one question on my end before we let you go.
Sure.
So on that same vein, we would want to avoid people looking at this as the perfect solution. and then blaming it or discarding it if it isn't that for them. So to be totally clear with people, what doesn't this solve when it comes to being implemented into these tournaments?
Yeah, I think just the best way to sum that up is this isn't, again, 100% solution. This is just the beginning to an implementation of an implementation for tournament organizers to have another source of data versus what's kind of already being done. So again, kind of like reiterating the, like PC checks and task manager checks and things like that. This is another way, rather than having to go into people's emails and look if they've ordered a cheap provider and seeing if there's a certain process that X person does, or a tournament organizer doesn't really understand in their task manager. This just provides another piece of data for somebody to be able to determine whether or not they are probably cheating or not. This isn't, again, 100% solution, because at the end of the day, to be quite frank, the only 100% solution would be a more robust Ricochet at the end of the day. It has to come from the actual developers. Similarly with whether it's Counter-Strike, Valorant, that's really the only way that you can actually get something going for that.
Sure. Makes a ton of sense. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited about implementation of this into the Twitter space and the Twitter tourneys. I'm extremely excited about working with those organizers to make this happen. Again, nothing is ever 100%, especially when human error is always going to be involved. However, this is a massive start and something that we, as a team, FoVeS team, can improve on into the future as well, the more it's utilized. So excited to play test that in FoVeS. Thank you so much for hopping on and explaining all of this to everyone at home.
Yes, sir. I appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, I appreciate the community support. And Gojj, the individual you've been talking on my behalf, and then also my brother's behalf, who's the lead developer on this. So, again, big shout out to him for getting this started, and the team as well. So,
absolutely excited to work more with you guys in the future.
Yes, sir. You guys take it easy.
Alrighty.
No, and Gojj, I think everything from FoVeS there is really excellent. And I mean, something within that's interesting to note for me is we have all this frustration around cheating with Call of Duty right now. And a lot of people are like, well, Valorant has a decent handle on it, and CSGO has a decent handle on it. So why don't we? It's because we haven't always been on PC. COD on PC is a very new thing. So COD was not, and maybe we should have had the foresight, but I mean, something like that's not necessarily realistic. COD moving on to PC, I just don't think anyone was prepared for the sheer volume and deluge of cheating that was going to hit it just by virtue of not being on consoles anymore. So I think whether it's Ricochet and Call of Duty, whether it's what FoVeS is doing when it comes to having Moss and having Face It, we're in the most painful point right now.
Yeah, right.
And I think once we get a handle on things, once we implement things like this, once things like this become routine, we're going to be in a much better place. It's never going to be a perfect place, but it's certainly going to be a lot healthier.
No, I couldn't agree more. Excited to have FoVeS in here, and we'll talk a lot more with FoVeS later. I know we have a couple content segments we really want to do to explain with tournament organizers exactly how it's going to work, test it out in certain tournaments. I know there's already tournament organizers talking with FoVeS to make sure that actually will start existing in their events, because I think it will start to help clean up our scene. But speaking of cleaning up our scene, we have another exciting guest to jump straight into with, so don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking a lot about some similar type concepts, but more so just tournaments in a general sense, because Katie, our guest here today that we're about to invite into the Twitter space as well into the Discord, is the one and only Mazida, who has been the BoomTV admin for all of their major tournaments for a long while now, and is someone that is loved in the community for the most part, and then sometimes hated because he has to make really hard decisions based on information that he has. And so excited to have a chance for Mazida to kind of speak about his experience in the admin and the tournament scene, but even more so than that, just talk about, hey, what does it even take to get an invite to some of these massive tournaments that Boom is a part of? And Mazida officially in. Let's go down to this
Hello?
page. There he is. Beautiful voice, Mazida.
Do that. Hello.
In the
Hello?
in the Twitter space as well. He's got the camera
Yes,
on.
sir.
There he is, man.
Hello.
I gotta say, Mazida, this might be the first time a lot of people have seen you on camera, and I just gotta let you know you're one handsome fella.
Well, thank you, Gojj. It's definitely not something I do all the time, but happy to be here and support the bot lobby.
This is the face of a man who gets bitched at by everyone.
All the time for everything. It is what it is. I mean, there's a devil, I guess, in everybody's corner apparently. So I'm happy to take on that role.
I love that. Well, hey, I need everybody in the Twitter space to show some love to Mazida. Throw some hearts in the chat. If you're in the Twitch chat as well, throw some hearts because we are excited to have Mazida on. We've been trying to have Mazida on for the last couple of weeks, and I know you were out of town. A lot to talk about, a lot to break down. Before we get anywhere, I'd love for you to kind of just intro how long you've been working with Boom from like the admin side and kind of this role that you actually have for people that don't know you outside of the tournament scene that are maybe listening from their cars on their way to work.
All right. So my name is Mazida. Obviously online. I've been a tourney admin now with Boom since early 2021. I believe January was kind of when I signed on with Boom full time. Prior to that, I worked with a brand known as Apex.pro, thanks to a good friend of mine, Chris Allen. Hello, thank you. Kind of gave me my big start here in esports. It's what transitioned me to Boom. And while I did want to keep everything Apex Legends centric when I was coming into esports, Warzone just kind of was on the up and coming, especially with Verdansk and kill races coming out. So it just kind of introduced me to the Warzone community. Everybody for the most part in Warzone has been really supportive, really understanding of obviously the tough day-to-day decisions that we have to make, but it's been a blast so far and I cannot wait to keep things rolling.
Love that.
So, Gojj, I wonder, do we want to kind of start some of this off with what we just heard from FoVeS while it's fresh in our mind?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, great. So, Mazida, you're here. I believe you were listening through kind of what we were talking with FoVeS about. It's a question we saw in chat, guys, and we highly encourage you to ask these questions while we have these people on with us. Are there any legal or like questionable things about say if Boom's enforced this, like you must be using this protocol? Is there anything on that end that's a problem there for you guys?
It would be a pretty lengthy internal discussion. I think especially being, a new up and coming software, obviously I would want our developers to even, dive into the code, if you will, and really take a look at things from our end before it kind of transitioned into becoming mandatory for players.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I know one thing that you and I talked about a little bit before we got started today, Mazida, was the good news about protocols like this is that it can be implemented into the grassroots scene, and that can inform the way that you guys start looking at tournament invites and things like that, right? Because we've had issues in the past with people that were alleged hackers and the people that were actually hackers sneaking their way into tournaments and getting caught or otherwise. And so let's kind of talk about that process about tournament invites, because I know this is something that players always ask you. I mean, I know, look, my DMs are swamped. My DMs are swamped. As a caster, your DMs must look like chaos. So could you, just from a general stance, kind of walk through the tournament invite process, and then maybe Katie and I can start asking you some particulars about that?
Sure. So one of the big things, just kind of to mention for everybody that's, looking for invites, when, let's say, Boom is going to fund a $25,000 Warzone tournament in 2 weeks. We put out the announcement. Everybody starts commenting. We get 200 comments that are, let me know, invite me, bro. And then we get DMs that are the same things. That does not help you stand out as a player. When you're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, you're lost. You're not going to be seen in the comments. You're not going to be seen in the DMs. If you're putting out a TikTok, are you putting out a TikTok that's the same as the person you kind of got an idea from? Are you copying another creator? No, you're doing your own original content. We've had a gentleman, I believe he was Jay Hayes, and this is all the way back in a November event. And he really stood out to us, and he earned himself an invite because he did something that nobody else was doing. He made a goofy little video of him brushing his teeth, asking for an invite, and explaining why he deserved that invite. And while we laughed about it internally for probably the better part of a month to 2 months, it still sticks in my head rent free because he did something different.
So you're
Now,
saying that complaining on Twitter is not the way to get into?
Complaining on Twitter, begging that you're not getting invites, saying you deserve invites is the best way to not get invites.
Okay.
No.
I like it. I like it. So because really, less than even just annoying you, it's more so it all just falls within the overall din of 100,000 people saying all the same things, right?
Exactly. It gets really repetitive. No one's really putting in the effort to make themselves stand out on an announcement post begging for an invite, but you're putting all this work into a YouTube video that's 17 seconds long. Take that same effort, or even 50% of the effort, and put that into share a video under the announcement. Why do you deserve a shot instead of 199 other people?
I love that. And I wanted to go down this train even further, because we all know, everybody at home, if you don't know this, you haven't watched a lot of tournaments, is that alongside this idea of running a large event, especially like a $25,000 event, there is an expectation that most of our large streamers will participate, right? And so
Yes.
when we start talking about the delineation between small streamers versus large streamers getting invite, clouded versus non-clouded players getting invite, it's very clear based on what you just said that the people that can actually put in effort and create content have a better chance at getting an invite. But what does it look like in that delineation if you can provide some of that background info of, hey, we need to invite X amount of big players, do we have this amount of small players? Is it kind of case by case, like that type of conversation?
Every event is different. To be totally transparent, everything's different from start to finish every single time. I never build the same document, the same plan twice when we're working on an event. It's never the same invite list. At least it never starts off as the same invite list. There's always, at the end of the day, a different end goal. Esports is a business. Hosting tournaments is a business. We're putting eyes onto different titles no matter what game we're working on at that time. So we do have to include some of the larger streamers. We do want to include some of the tier 2, the tier 3, and we do want to give a chance to some of those players that are up and coming. There's so many underrated demons out there in Warzone. To say let's put all of them into a tournament just doesn't make physical business sense.
Yeah.
But when we're including, the Huskers and the Aidens, the Swags, the Tommies, the Booyahs, etc., and then we're giving them a chance to play against these tier 3, tier 4 players, that's when we can start to create opportunities. So it's never going to be a perfect balance, at least in the players' eyes, of the biggest talent and the up-and-comers. The last thing we want to do is, take a shot on one of these up-and-comers, and it turns out that, they're injecting hacks and they did not use FoVeS approved process.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Has that made what you just said? Has that made you guys a little shy about perhaps taking on those risks of new players?
I can't say yes and I can't say no. One of the nice things about what we do here at Boom is we offer the Proving Ground scrims, through Warzone, and it's a great way to put your name not only in front of us here at Boom, but in front of other competitors like yourself. Great name that comes to mind, Pantsnome, great guy. He has showed up for probably every single scrim that I've hosted since I started him. He shows up, he frags out, he has a blast. He's earned himself a couple invites to some of the larger events that we've hosted, just off of his ability to read the rules, show up, participate, and create some content around those events.
I love that the first thing you said was read the rules.
I saw it earlier in chat, it is 98% of my day.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I think that's a great kind of transition point to when we start talking about invites, we start talking about players, and we start talking about, the players that you'd like to invite back. The ideal player is somebody that reads the rules, but break us down from the admin side, the types of players that you really enjoy working with, not names, but like the type of people. What do they do right that other people can kind of emulate?
They follow the rules, number one. They have mods that help, if it is a score reporting situation, they're reporting scores very quickly. I know you said no names. Tay is a mod for 5x5 for Holly. Probably one of the best mods out there in Warzone. She titles all the clips correctly, so we barely have to double check scoring. And something like that alone can literally put you into our favorite players, if you will, quote unquote. But it comes down to just being able to read the rules. You're showing up on time. If I send you a Discord invite 3 weeks before an event and you don't join it until an hour after the tournament started, you've kind of weaseled your way out of my favorite.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. And it's not just like a personal bias. It's more so how do we run our business effectively and create a good competitive environment to where people will want to come back and continue to participate in our tournaments, right? Like that it all goes into the business decision more so than just, oh, you pissed Mazida off one time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and it's nothing to do like that. I mean, I've gone toe to toe with some of the names in the Warzone community. We've kind of screamed at each other a little bit and gotten in each other's face. But at the end of the day, it's just the day of jitters. And, I'm not going to not invite somebody to an event because me and them had a contest of, who's right, who's wrong.
Yeah.
It's who can read the rules, who can show up on time, who's not causing a lot of drama, who's, we obviously nobody likes drama in the scene. There's always going to be drama in the scene. So let's avoid it as best as possible and go from there.
So how has your handling of these interactions, like some of the ones that you've just mentioned, how has that evolved as time has gone on in terms of kind of if players are being difficult or anything like that? How has your kind of like action points evolved?
I can't really speak on how they've evolved, I guess. Myself as a person, I've just become a little bit more patient. I've tried to be understanding. I do play Warzone, when I can. So I try and, sympathize with any of the issues that do or may come up. And we just kind of go from there. Everything's different. Every case is different. Every potential cheater in a 2v2 is different. Every potential hacker in a customs is different. So you handle everything case by case. And I come from a background in sales where you sympathize, you listen, you sympathize, and then you come up with a solution. And that very easily transitions over to Warzone into the events that we're running.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think this is enlightening for a lot of people that haven't ever thought from your perspective how things go, because a lot of our players, there's so many different tournaments to choose from. They kind of just log in, play their event, and then, go on their merry way. And if something is slightly different or not the way they like it, oftentimes they just shift blame to Boom or shift blame to you and then move on. When you start thinking from the admin perspective, it really does open your eyes a little bit of why, Boom is doing the things we're doing, which is why we're able to do this interview and excited to continue to walk through this. And I think one of the big question marks has been the hacking question. I want to spend just a little bit more time on this because I know you are so directly involved in all of these discussions. When you are working with players on hacking allegations, whether in the tournament itself or even just like, is this person a hacker in a 2v2? What are some of the things that you kind of take in to make those decisions, from conversations with the pros that you're working with, as well as what you've seen in the way you guys determine whether somebody is hacking or not?
One thing that we definitely take into consideration, at least I can't say we, I will say one thing I take into consideration is this a person who is always making claims? Is this a person who every time they die to Timmy Two Thumbs, who got his first kill ever on Warzone, is he a hacker all of a sudden? But there's so many different things to take into account. Like I said earlier, everything is kind of case by case. There's no perfect way to do it. There's no set way to do it. I know that, us three have had conversations on the side about, what goes into this and kind of what comes out of it on the player side, but there's no real perfect answer. It's just, again, it's kind of case by case.
Sure.
But depending on the player, depending on the proof they provide, if it's a definitive clip, great, we can shake it off and, do a reset. But everything's different every single day.
So something we just saw in chat, I know Gojj just tagged it as well. Voltrace has a question about scrims. How often are those scrims ran? When are they ran? How can you find out more about them?
So I host scrims on Monday nights, and they start at 7 p.m. Eastern. Normally, I do them 1 to 2 times a month. I do run them in my free time once I'm done with my daily things here at Boom. So it's not a perfect schedule, but you can find any information you want on them if you go to boom.tv. If you see any scrims lined up there in the featured events, then you are free to sign up. I do ask that you just follow the rules.
Love that.
There are no scrims planned right now, so there's not going to be any right on the homepage, just so anybody going there knows.
Okay, great. So I guess from taking a step back to just your life in general around Boom and what you're doing at a TO, because again, a lot of people, they have no concept of the nuances behind the scenes. So are there any things that you've noticed consistently people seem to not understand about being a TO and organizing and executing on these events?
I think one thing a lot of people don't understand is how much time, passion, and hours we put into planning an event. There have been numerous events where we're 100 hours deep. We've been doing this, we've been doing that, going back and forth with our assets team and marketing and social media. And then one little thing doesn't go their way. And the first thing they do is take to Twitter and they bitch out the admins, they bitch out the tournament platform, whatever it may be. It's not that simple. There are so many things you can plan for, but there are so many things you can just not account for. So I think a better understanding of what really goes into, planning an event and kind of everybody involved behind the scenes. I mean, it's not just me. We have a marketing team, we've got a social media, or we've got marketing, we've got assets, we've got approvals we have to go through just internally. And it's a long process. So it's very frustrating after spending, all this time, all this effort, booking casters, yourself included, and then to have somebody go out on Twitter and just kind of bash the event is, it's never a fun thing to see, but, you just kind of shrug it off and try to move on.
Sure. I mean, you guys have to deal with a lot of negativity, a lot of positivity, hopefully as well, but a lot of negativity from the from players' side, because again, it is that idea of like, hey, we played in this event, now we're going to focus on this event. That's 24 hours from now, and you guys have been working on this event for potentially several months at this point, depending on the size of the event, and so oftentimes that can get lost on players. But it's a great point to make too. Let's talk a little bit about I know you can't leak plans for the future. However, one of the big things that has been circulating the scene currently is this idea around LANs. Katie and I talked for a while about how LANs are very difficult to execute, not only from a money side of things, and the cost of LANs are obviously more expensive than an online event, but also some issues potentially around shadow bans, ricochet, all other kinds of craziness that can't happen. It is doable though, especially if you're working with Activision. You don't have to leak anything, and I'm not asking that from you, but is there plans in the future for Boom to potentially be on the production side and the hosting side of LAN tournaments, whether Warzone or other games?
I mean, as far as other games are concerned, I am hosting an Apex LAN next month. Very excited. It'll be my first little LAN that I've done. Local shop opened up, and I am just beyond ecstatic for that. As far as Warzone, other titles are confirmed. Can't really say anything just yet, but we do hope to, keep everybody on their toes as the year moves on.
So I wonder then, kind of in that same vein, say maybe not LANs just yet, but when we've talked about the horizon for things like Warzone 2, Gojj and I have spent a lot of time talking about what are the things that we need on a main broadcast side, and specifically a caster side, to enrich the main broadcast to make it a more enticing place for people to visit when they're not just there to ask why we're not watching someone's POV or complaining that everything is rigged. And let's be clear, there's a core of really excellent people who are there, but are there features you would like to see become available to kind of make that a better main broadcast experience for viewers?
I honestly can't think of anything off the top of my head that's immediate. One thing I personally love about the both of you, and why you both were part of a big series that we just hosted, is the energy that you bring. Your energy is always top notch. Even 15, 16 hours into an event, you guys are ready to go. You've got your coffees lined up. Your 17th one for the day. Katie's got all those snacks and KFC buckets under her desk.
Ew, it's a Snoop Dogg bucket now.
It's a Snoop Dogg. Okay, Snoop Dogg bucket. But no, it's honestly, it's the energy that casters bring to a broadcast that makes the broadcast so much better than either having a mediocre caster or no casters at all. There's a lot of different brands out there that do Bravo streams and Charlie streams, and you can tell just going to that cast, there's no casters, there's no real call by call. And it's not as exhilarating to watch from a user endpoint. So having, I think, just honestly the energy that's brought to the cast via the casters is one of the biggest things.
I've got to step in here. If anybody from Activision's listening, let's be very clear. We need a caster mode, some sort of a spectator mode for private matches so that we can tell an overarching story. Okay, like a map overview, maybe people flying, a free cam would be amazing. I mean, there's a lot here, but yes, I agree. Caster energy is super important for main broadcast to attract viewers, but yes, I need to throw that in there.
For that to turn into Mazida gassing us.
I liked it though.
I was here for it, but no, I agree. I mean, we talk about that world where, what if on main broadcast, as you watch that plane animation fly through, you are able to go to a view of the mini map and see where the players are going, like where they're dropping on the map, all of them at once. I think things like that, and especially you said that caster mode could just really make that broadcast, at least elevate it to the next level. We simply just don't have those tools yet. But hopefully.
I have full faith in the team over there at Raven. Very excited to see what's next on the platter for them, and hopefully that's one of those features.
I love that. Well, okay, let's take some time here. I know you're super deep into the Apex scene. You and I have had a lot of conversations around Apex. I've done an Apex event actually with you.
Just a few, yes.
Yeah, which is awesome. But wanted to talk about Boom and your involvement in other titles as well. I know Boom has been making a roll through. They've done some Valorant recently, Apex, and even like not Path of Exile. You guys did a lot of different game title events. What are some new game titles or old game titles that Boom is starting to do from the event side of things that you're excited about?
So we've been doing a little bit of Lost Ark as well. We're doing that through our Proving Grounds program. We've done Sea of Thieves. We worked very closely with Game Pass to do a Halo event back in December that was totally reinvigorated my love for Halo. It was a childhood dream, to be able to work, on a Halo event. But we're always keeping our eyes out on the next and the best. What are people playing? What are people enjoying? And granted, most of my following on Twitter, I follow a lot of Warzone and Apex pros. What are they talking about that aren't those titles?
Yeah.
Right now, Overwatch 2 is one of the big ones. What's the future of Overwatch 2? What did they change from Overwatch? So just kind of keeping an eye on literally anything. Valorant's still running super strong. We have a Proving Grounds program running for that. Apex is going to be kicking off again here shortly, but always looking.
It's great. Well, Katie, the last question I have is a fun one for Mazida to kind of just speak his mind, because we've asked you a good amount of questions tonight, and we really appreciate you popping onto the broadcast and giving us a lot of the insight. I know so many players DM me, you, Katie, and people in between production, even probably the media team over at Boom, like, how do I get invites to tournaments? But what's something that like you wish we would have asked you that you could kind of speak your mind on, that you wanted kind of share, at least on this platform?
I don't honestly know, especially since you just put me under that pressure. But one thing, just to kind of hit the nail on the head again: stand out, be different. You don't deserve an invite; you earn an invite. So if you see these $20 buy-in tournaments that are going on, whether it's Miss Know-It-All, whether it's Papa Hex, whoever's hosting it, Big Baller Brady, he does a lot of them as well. Mm-hmm. If you have the chance to play in a tournament, whether it's for $5 or for $500 or for $5,000, play in it. If it costs you a couple dollars out of pocket, you're going to play a lot better because you don't want to lose that money and come home empty-handed. When you have the opportunity to play with scrims, play with players that are, a tier above you, learn from that. Go back and watch your VODs. Why did you die when you ego challenged? Because you ego challenged. You shouldn't have pushed a 4-stack. Watch VODs almost just as much as you play. And Katie, I know that I think it was yourself and Gojj that we were talking about this after an event, is you have to learn from your mistakes.
Yes. I love so much that you said that, because I've time and time again, I have seen people complain about losing in a tournament, but simultaneously at a later time admit that they never do VOD review. And yes, those things go directly hand in hand. I understand that you're not a pro in the CDL and it's not required of you, but if you want to get better at this, you need to be watching those VODs. Reach out to another player and ask them if there's someone that if you really like how Z-Smith plays, reach out to him and be like, hey, would you ever have the free time? Would you mind taking a look at my VOD with me and see what I did wrong? More often than not, depending on who you ask, they're probably going to say yes.
And you could probably even form a new duo doing that. You just VOD swap at the end of the week. Be like, hey, if you don't mind watching a couple hours of my VOD, I'll watch a couple hours of yours. Point out my mistakes, I'll point out yours. Just be honest with each other. It's never going to be a perfect situation. So you have to continue to grow, and to do that, you have to kind of review why you're not.
That's great. Those are great words to live by. I saw somebody say that in chat of you don't deserve an invite. You're supposed to earn an invite. And there's a lot of ways you can earn an invite. Mazida went through a lot of them today. So again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to put you on the spot one more time. You can say you can't answer this question. That's totally fine. What has been your favorite event that you've done at Boom?
And why was it with us?
Well, I was gonna say in general. You can have an in general answer, and then you have to pick one Warzone event that you loved.
My favorite event that I've done so far here at Boom was back in November. We partnered with BenQ Mobius to do a 10K for Apex Legends. I got to work with Fallout and Girl, which always been a fan of Fallout. He kind of got me into esports a little bit back in like 2016. Kind of took me under his wing. So thank you, Fallout. Appreciate that. But I got to work with, all the tier 1 Apex teams, and it was just an absolute dream come true for me. I've been working on the event for just so long. So to see that come to fruition, huge, absolutely huge. Favorite event that I've done with you guys was actually our most recent series. It was a blast. We did 4 events together, a lot of long nights. I think we probably logged 80, 90 hours in the books together.
Oh
Yeah, 100K.
So that was a lot of fun. It was a blast from start to finish, despite all the long nights, despite me posting a winter suite at 5:30 in the morning, and then just going to bed and waking up in a couple hours to do it all over again. So I'd have to say that was my favorite with you too.
No, I mean, I can't say it enough times. Mazida, working with you is an absolute delight. And I say this all the time when it comes to Boom. You guys treat talent so well. I could not, and I don't just mean in terms of patting me on the head and saying, there, Katie, like, we'll get through this, it's okay, even when I'm having a fit and I'm tired, right? I mean, in terms of the prep that you provide to us, whether it's the documents, the live tracking sheets that we need, the information in the moment from whoever it might be behind the scenes on a player or what's happening, have they been eliminated, where are they on the map, what's going on, you guys have really set a kind of a golden standard for what we're at least able to do right now, given what's provided to us from Warzone itself. I really can't say thank you enough. You make it a ton of fun for us every single time. I think I can speak for Gojj in saying that as well, that it's always a pleasure. You guys do a really, really top-notch job.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm always happy. I mean, at the end of the day, you guys are, you're the talent that are relaying all the information. So happy to give you all the info we can. And I know that you're not great at math, so I want to make sure you have a sheet that helps.
Let's be clear, Katie.
Five times
I'm going to gas you both up, but I'm going to take you down a little.
Katie is bad at math. I can do math on stream, on broadcast. We're putting that into the atmosphere.
And I said it was 10. So yes, we don't ever go to me for math ever.
Well, Mazida, again,
it's always fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. Shout yourself out on socials. I know you don't do it for the personal clout, but shout yourself out on socials, because that's where people can at you. Don't DM him necessarily. At him with your really cool content piece to get invited to tournaments. Of course, you can do that with Boom as well, but shout yourself out on Twitter and all socials.
So Instagram and Twitter is at MazidaGG, M-A-Z-A, and my Twitch is just Mazida. I stream there every once in a random blue moon, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. It's probably adult-related humor, I guess I would say. But, if you ever want to vibe, come through, play some Apex, I'm there.
Love that. Well, it was an absolute pleasure having you on. So much pertinent information for all of our competitors at home, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again in not too long from now.
I am here when you're ready.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Gojj, I love it. We just got so much incredible information from both FoVeS and Mazida. So once again, a huge thank you to them for taking the time out of their Wednesday to come on and talk with us. And I love what Mazida had to say when it comes to standing out. You can't assume that base level effort is going to get you anywhere. If you want to stand out in the millions of Twitter replies that they get about these events, do what Jay Hayes did. Do something that catches their eye and allows you to start building that rapport with them.
Yeah, that was insanely insightful. The back-to-back guest goes hard. I'm not gonna lie, because we had some incredibly intensive information that was given from FoVeS, and then Mazida was just a wealth of knowledge as well. And I think I've said it a couple times, and I want to reiterate it to you. Just because you play a lot of tournaments, just because you feel like you understand the competitive scene better than anyone, doesn't mean you understand what admins are doing behind the scenes to make these events possible, right? The admins like Mazida are the reason that we have $100,000 events that you have the opportunity to win $33,000 personally in the span of 10 hours for. Like, that is crazy. It is so unique to esports, and we're so happy to have people like Mazida that are working so hard behind the scenes to give each of our players, and of course our talent like Katie, myself, and others, the opportunities to make a living doing what we do. So again, shout out to both of the individuals we had on. Excited to talk more with both of them later with some Q&A time. That'll probably be in another episode. Katie, we've got a couple more topics we want to jump into before we close out the podcast today. We have a new season. Everybody knows that. There's been a lot of changes. We don't have to go through all of those changes. That's not what we do. We talk about the comp scene, but there were a couple things that I wanted to mention before we jump into our topics. And then, of course, we have to talk about the CDLR, which just happened not too recently. There's some fun, exciting points around that, and then a little bit of some Shitter's Digest with our Twitter timeline that we always love jumping into. So I say, Katie, let's go ahead and just briefly talk about season 3, because this is pertinent to at least some of our viewers right now. Is, hey, a lot of changes went through. The big thing worth noting, from at least our side of things, from the comp scene, and I'm sure this will be changed and fixed soon, is that private matches were actually shut down for now. They have been put on a pause. They cannot be accessed, at least not for the day or the next 2 days or 3 days or 4 days. Hopefully they're not the next 5 days though, Katie, because there is a massive $50,000 private match rebirth tournament coming up with NYSL that you are actually a part of from the casting side of things. And I can only imagine all of the issues that are in private matches will be fixed by then.
I would have to assume, I would hope and think that there was some level of communication or coordination that happened to this. Obviously, when it comes to the game stability, server stability, it's a bit rough right now. And guys, just understand, everyone behind the scenes, there's people who deeply, deeply love and care about this game and are working tirelessly to fix these issues. So if you see someone talking about it, please don't take your ire out on them. That's not who you should be directing that toward. But anyway, yeah, so they've taken out private messages for the time being, but we have the NYSL kind of third event they've done, this tournament coming up. And I would like to think this is kind of priority level maintenance. It would seem a bit disjointed if they would take these down so close to a tournament and not plan to have it up in time for that tournament again. So we'll have to get that speculation. I don't know. We can't assume that people directly working on servers have been in contact with an esports org about a tournament. Sometimes that's not how that works. But I'd like to think it's going to be up and running, at least in that regard, whether it's things like fixing the server stability, kind of a lot of those bugs and glitches that are happening with zipline, stuff like that should definitely be a priority to smooth out.
Yeah, there were a lot of issues in private matches. I'm hoping too, with the server fixes and the zipline fixes, that there will be some more things that were in public matches that just got added that will be transitioned over to customs. Sometimes we see a fairly decently long lag in time span of those changes being implemented into customs. I'm hoping it's fairly quick. One of the notable, I would say there's two very notable changes that are coming with this season that are currently in the game, are the sniper changes, Katie, and then the lootable perks. And so very briefly, let's talk about how those will affect the comp scene. I think number one, sniper changes are massive, right? We mentioned it before we went live. A lot of our sniper rifles no longer headshot one shot at a certain range distance. So they have a max range that they still one shot if you hit a headshot, and those ranges are fairly minimal. Now, in the patch notes, it does say about like 1,300 is the distance. 1,300 is actually measured in inches. And so when you convert that to meters, which is an insane and weird conversion, I don't know why they do that, but when you convert it to meters, which is actually what the ping system gives us, that's about 33 meters that they still headshot. Now, if you put the red attachments on it, you increase the damage range, you could probably get that up to about 48 to 50 meters. That Car 98, for instance, Modern Warfare Car 98 still headshots. Anything past 50, 51 meters, it is not a one-shot headshot. This is a massive point, not only for the potential unban of snipers in private matches, but also the big point in 2v2s that is causing so much duress, which is the guy sitting on top of Peak with a Modern Warfare Car 98 getting lasered down by a Bren, and he can shoot through those shots and still headshot you, and it's extremely frustrating. So it's a huge change that'll change the way the game is played.
No, I love it. And at a base level, it simply makes sense. A marksman rifle should not be both more flexible and more powerful in terms of bullet punch than something like an actual sniper, like an AX-50, for example. I shouldn't be able, and I know maybe Breadman's going to shed a tear, but when you have something like a Car 98K, it's just not going to be feasible in any competitive format to allow something like that where you can be quick scoping. The ADS is so instantaneous. It's really easy to punish people with that gun when it simply shouldn't be that strong. So I think potential here to shift into a meta where maybe in private matches, things like snipers are allowed one per team. I know sometimes that's still a thing, but allowed one per team, and people with those nerfs might switch over to using more of those heavy duty sniper rifles. I think that can potentially open up the meta a little bit more as well, give some more viability to options that previously just weren't useful to these players. So I personally like it, and that's actually something that's been implemented extremely quickly from the discussion Baka Bros had with a developer from Raven Software, and he said to look forward to changes for things like that, and boom, right into Season 3 we see that. So I think that's a huge pain point for people that's going to be eased with this update.
Yeah, the next big piece is the lootable perks. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this, Katie, but I'd love to hear just your general take, at least from what we've seen right now, which is the last hour that it's been out. What do you think this will do for the comp scene? Do you think these are things that will be banned? Do you think these are things that will be able to be left in the game? I mean, they are less good, if you will, specialists. Like, it's just a single perk that can stack on top of your loadout perks, but this does kind of air into this gray area that pros sometimes like to try to ban, which is RNG helps you in a fairly decent or sizable manner, aka finding a high alert perk in a box.
Yeah, so there's 8 perks that you can find as ground loot in supply boxes through Caldera and Rebirth. Just to rattle those off really quick, that's going to be Battle Hardened, Engineer, High Alert, Quick Fix, Restock, Scavenger, Tempered, and Point Man, which is a Plunder exclusive one, so probably not really relevant to our discussion. Things like this, I would not be surprised if this gets transitioned into customs in any capacity. It is banned. I think I would not be surprised if it's one of many things. If you see it in a box that you open up, you cannot pick it up. When it comes to 2v2s, all I know is that at some point we are going to have a discussion on Bot Lobby where in the final endings of a grand final 2v2 kill race, someone opens a box and happens to get something like a high alert, and it helps them win the game, and there's going to be rage involved in that.
Sure.
And I personally am here for it, but it does add just another one of those RNG elements to things like kill races where maybe you get lucky and you find it and good for you. Maybe you don't, and that's just tough luck. And I imagine that that's just one in a long list of things that it's going to be a frustration for players.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept. I love the idea for pubs lobbies, just general play, because it does incentivize looting, which is something that we've seen fall to the wayside unless you're looking for money. It incentivizes, hey, we need open boxes even if we have loadouts because we have an opportunity to stack perks, which will help us do better. Like, I do like that idea. It kind of sticks within this battle royale type game mode rather than just like grab your loadout game mode, which is arguably a different type of game than just a traditional battle royale. But all of that to say, I think you're right. I think a lot of pro players in particular will say, how do we mitigate a lot of the RNG? One of the ways to mitigate RNG is to take out the ability to use those perks in customs in particular. I think 2v2s, there's no way anybody would actually ban them, although people will probably rage. Yeah, really. People will probably rage on the timeline. So good things to note. Definitely some big updates. There's a lot of nerfs and stuff. We're not going to go through all the patch notes. It's not what we do. There's 1,000 other YouTubers that go through them. Go check out Tim the Tatman, J God, Modern Warzone, whoever you want to go get more information on the patch notes. We want to talk about the things that will specifically affect comp. And the big thing is, when will private matches come back? Because we've got tournaments coming. But Katie,
hopefully before the New York Subliners event.
Yeah, hopefully. Speaking of Rebirth, speaking of tournaments, speaking of comp scene and private matches, let's talk about the CDLR very briefly. Let's walk through results and honestly general impressions, because you and I had a fairly extensive emergency episode where we had UnRationaL on to talk about the different teams that were announced, who he thought would do well in Group A, who he thought would do well in Group B, and who he thought would do very well in the event. And well, of course, he gassed himself up, and guess what happened, Katie? The LAG team, Huskers, UnRationaL, ScummN, and Apathy did win the entirety of the event, taking home the lion's share of the 100K, which is extremely exciting for that quad.
Yeah, and it was actually, I think, the first big first place win Apathy has had. So congratulations to him on that. But when we talk about it, right, I wrote an article for this going into it for Call of Duty League that was talking about the 5 teams we expected to get out of each semi group. There was 10 teams in each group, 20 total. Only 5 could make it from each group into that final, which was 10 teams. And I actually had discussions with you about this, and we kind of settled on those teams. And I think we got 4 out of 5 on each group. Yep. Unfortunately, Dad Bods did fall shy in Semi A, was not able to qualify, and then I think it was a Rocker, which was kind of our question mark team.
It was to be clear,
Fairy team, they did not qualify either.
Let's be very clear. When you and I were discussing the teams we thought we would qualify, picking 5 in Group A was difficult, and the 5th was still kind of a question mark, but we really believed in Dad Bods. And then in Group B, we got 4, and we got the 4 correct that did qual. The 5th, we were like, literally could be anybody. Let's just pick somebody. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to say Blast and Preset are going to do really well in this tournament. I'm going to give them a bit of the doubt. Well, they did it. They got absolutely dumpstered on and were dead last by quite a sizable margin. So my bad on that one. But other than that, 4 out of 5 at both groups, pretty impressive. The big surprise, though, was maybe not necessarily who won, because you would expect them to do very well, but it was who didn't do well in the finale. Barely qualifying, getting, I believe, 4th or 5th in Group A was LA Thieves, which is TBE +1, which was rated. And then in the finale, I believe they got like 7th or something like that. And yeah, a little bit of not even a little bit of a disappointment. Like, it's very clear we can say, you know, this is a disappointment as a team. They have earned $250,000 as a trio in Caldera. They won a 10K tournament against a lot of the same teams in Rebirth. Like, they were expected to win or do top 3, and they were 7th.
I expected at bare minimum for them to make it into the money. I said that they were the team that is gonna win it all. You should win it all realistically, considering the pedigree of the players there. But just to rattle them off, it was Gorillas who came in first. Tiberius Khan came in second. Subliners, FaZe, Paris, Team Diverge, Seattle Surge, and then Thieves, and then Haha and Goats. So you look at that and you say, how does a team with Tommy, Almond, Noobs, and Rated take 8th place overall in this? And this is the 3rd time as a trio that TBE have not won in the last few tournaments they've all played in together. They've taken 2 second places and then this 8th place. I don't think there's really anything in particular to look into that. I think they're still by far that best trio in the game. But there's nothing else you can say here that's not simply, that's a disappointing finish, and I cannot attribute that all to just RNG and bad landings and things not going their way. I mean, maybe if you got 4th or 5th and you were just outside the money, but I was very shocked to see that outcome for them.
Yeah, I mean, let's briefly talk about this, because Tiberius Khan was a surprise, a huge surprise for, to be very clear, a huge surprise for the people on main broadcast that were casting the event, and maybe some people that don't actually understand or know the tournament scene. But for you and I, it was Tiberius Khan qualified, yes, but I mean, what are we talking about? Picnic, Nickel, like this team is twisted, plays Rebirth a ton, and to be very clear, Nickel even was the one on Twitter that was saying, oh, I love that nothing is banned. This is how all tournaments should be, because he was slapping people around with a shotgun. Like, you know, they were going to do well, and they certainly did. Had a chance to win the event, ended up getting second. Huge congratulations to that team. I was very... I will be very curious to see how the reaction / the changes that will come into with the rule set going forward, because we talked about how this was a tester event for EU, a tester event for future tournaments like this. I can only imagine with the feedback that they were given, whether it was from me or whether it was from other people in the community, that I think the rules will be tweaked going into the next one.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Keep in mind from the very beginning, they were clear, CDLR, this is a test run of this. This is a trial run. That's why it was NA specific. And I think there's so much to be learned, both positive things to build upon and things that maybe need to be altered as takeaways from this. So I do very much so hope that they continue to lean into CDLR and expand upon it, because it seems like there's a very, very solid idea there that can be turned into something amazing.
Right.
So, and we know that they're very interested in kind of building on that as well. So I think them kind of being receptive to that feedback, which I know, or at least I've heard that they are, all point to signs that they want to continue turning this into something that's even better than it is.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear about this, because this isn't like too behind the scenes. Like it is apparent Activision reps and people working behind the scenes on CDLR are reaching out to certain people in the community to say, hey, what can we do better? How can we improve on this product? We want to keep doing these types of product, whether it's a competitive product or a content focused product is up to them. But regardless, we will see more. It has been confirmed we will see more, at least from what we understand, and they're always looking to improve. So any critical feedback is always great, as long as it's phrased in a way that is helpful, not hurtful. Just because you didn't like one thing, doesn't mean you go scream about it on the timeline. Instead, how do we write up a fairly intensive paragraph on, hey, this is why this would do better, right? Like that's kind of the idea. So anyways, excited about hearing they're looking for more feedback, excited to see what they do with this product into the future. Overall results, Katie, were fairly about what we thought would happen, besides of course that LA Thieves surprise. And I wouldn't even say a rocker not qualifying surprise. That's not even a surprise. So
yeah, that was I mean, that one was just hard because there was a couple of shoo-ins and the rest of them were like, we're just gonna throw a dart and see how this goes. But yeah, I'm excited to see where they go through from here. But I think Gojj, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to say in regards to CDLR, or if we should talk a little bit about some of our Shitters Digest tea that we've been brewing.
Yeah, no, let's jump into it. We'll have more opportunities to talk about tournament scene and what things can change. I mean, we've talked about that a ton already on this podcast today. So let's jump into a little bit of some Shitters Digest, because this is always fun conversations to end off the podcast. Chat, if you guys didn't know, this is the section of the podcast. We are creating a separate section called the Shitters Digest, where we pull up random Twitter drama and bring it to the light and talk about it in an informal or a formal manner, without like, putting shade on people, right? We're gonna bring up what's been happening and talk about it, because it's always interesting. Sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's pretty intense. So in the Shitters Digest section today, Katie, what do we have on the table?
There's been a breakup of a beautiful couple.
They've
been together for so long. They love tweeted each other. Mm-hmm. They win tournaments with each other, but who knows? Maybe no longer. Yeah, ScummN dumped Gary. Gary is UnRationaL, if you're unfamiliar. At least for one tournament trial run with noobs, who recently dumped Huskers. So maybe a new romance blossoming for them. But this is a big thing, right? ScummN and UnRationaL have duoed forever. And initially, ScummN loves to bait tweet. He's the king of bait tweets. He's the king of tweeting and deleting.
He has 17 birthdays a month, right?
17 birthdays. His age ranges from 18 to like 35, who knows?
Sure.
And so when Noobs first announced that Huskers and him were no longer going to be duoing, and they were both looking for different options, ScummN tweeted multiple bait tweets at Noobs, basically teasing around like, hey, guess we're going to have to give this a try. Like, wow. And we didn't put a lot of stock into it at first because that's what ScummN does. He baits a lot. But it was an interesting question that arose was ScummN and Noobs, how strong of a duo could they be? Could they consistently challenge maybe someone like Tommy and Almond? And apparently those were not as baity as we thought they were. They had actual substance to them. So ScummN and Noobs are going to be doing a trial run duo in Mina Mendez's 10K. And apparently, allegedly, ScummN had said he was going to do this with UnRationaL, but that is no longer the case here. But this is a trial run. I think UnRationaL was caught off guard by this, not too thrilled about it. There were some sad tweets expressed early on, but then they've also had, of course, some lovey-dovey tweets. But then again, also ScummN and Noobs have been tweeting out duo photos, deleting those, tweeting them again. So a lot of shenanigans on the timeline, but ScummN and Noobs, if they do well in this, there's a very real possibility, even if they don't do well, Gojj, that UnRationaL is going to be looking for his new duo.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy because not only did they just win the Rebirth tournament together, of course, with Huskers and Apathy, but they've won tons of tournaments in the past. I mean, if you pull up Warzone earnings, even on Caldera, you can see the events they've won together. They've won several. And then in Verdansk, even, like, this duo has been playing together forever and really has been coming into their own. ScummN in particular, of course, in Caldera. And so when you start separating people out, and you saw we talked about the Noobs and Huskers separation, that was very mutual. This one was not as mutual, at least from what we understand. Like, it was ScummN saying, I'm going to try something else, where UnRationaL, Gary was, or Gavin, or whatever you want to call him, Larry, he has 1,000 different names. It was like, no, I want to keep doing this duo. And ScummN was like, I'm going to try this with Noobs. And Gary was like, what? Essentially was the way we understood the situation going down. And so the big question marks are, will Noobs and ScummN gel and do well? I can only conjecture they will do well. They're both incredibly talented individuals. Noobs can kind of play the less talkative, slower paced role. ScummN can maybe play a bit more aggressive than maybe he was able to do with Gary. I don't know. And then from the other side, the other question becomes, Katie, where does UnRationaL go? Who does he start doing with? Because we've had some splits, but does he go grab Huskers? I mean, there's a lot of question marks around where Gavin goes next.
Yeah, and here's the thing, guys. There's no absolute confirmation that this duo is done and dusted.
Sure.
Right. ScummN said he wants to do a trial run with Noobs. I'm reading between the lines with that. But again, that's me reading between the lines. That's not something that's been absolutely confirmed. But when you look at UnRationaL, if they do decide to stick together and he's looking for a second, no, I don't think that you pick up Huskers. I do not think that is a winning combination of the two of them. But then you say, well, what are his other options? And the question is, you have what's going on with people like ZSmit. ZSmit plays a lot with Aiden, but he's not always guaranteed to be duoing it with Aiden. Yeah. Is there an option there for an UnRationaL and ZSmit to see how they play together? There's people like Rated who are getting back into tournaments and who have had wild success in Verdansk and come back into tournaments and already seen success in Caldera. Is Rated an option? There's a lot of players that have potential there. But for UnRationaL, if ScummN and Noobs do end up becoming a duo, I don't see that as anything except, unfortunately, an L for UnRationaL.
Yeah, okay, so here's the question. If it's not one of the big names, what are some maybe smaller names that Gary would take a chance on? I don't know how close he is with some of the up-and-comers, but if he can find somebody that's an up-and-comer and just kind of come out of nowhere and start swinging it around, and if it works, I mean, I personally think Gary needs to link up with somebody that is a demon slayer, like goes out full sins, and Gary can kind of play the more reserved option. I'm talking about 2v2s in particular. Trios oftentimes will get shifted up and change in customs, and that's a whole other conversation. And really 2v2s are at the primary. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was gonna say, at least in those trios, Gojj, it's gonna still be, I think, Huskers, ScummN, and UnRationaL, because Noobs is going to be with TBE.
Yeah, and that's probably true. Yeah, exactly, because Noobs will be with TBE. Now, if they have a lot of beef, that could potentially change. But for 2v2s in particular, which is really the primary tournament form besides Rebirth tournaments, I see UnRationaL trying to pick up. Could go, but if it's not Z-Smith, could go Stu Kawaki. I don't know if Stu plays as no holds bars as UnRationaL needs in a 2v2. Could go somebody like Imsage, could go somebody like Oki, could go somebody like potentially, well, I'll stay away from that. Maybe Hisoka. I think Hisoka will continue to play with. Yeah, but Hisoka will continue playing with Jukis. They're playing together right now on a lot of wagers, traveling around, playing together for the Red Bull Tour. That duo makes a lot of sense, especially if FIFA starts airing other directions in 2v2s, which it seems to be the case still. There's a lot of question marks around the scene. All I know is there are a couple up-and-coming young demons that if Gary is willing, it's not even a swallow the pride thing, more so recognizing of that talent and willing to make a leap on a couple tournaments, even if it's like a 10K or two, just see if the chemistry makes sense. I don't know. That's where my brain goes.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart. It's tough to see him. And again, this isn't confirmed. We don't know this for sure. But based on how these things usually go, we can assume ScummN might be serious about moving over to Noobs, but it's tough for UnRationaL because it puts him in an unexpectedly very tricky position. He sits at 9th in the earnings. ScummN is sitting at 6th. Of course, Noobs is in 3rd alongside Almond and Tommy, who are in 1st and 2nd respectively. But there's a lot of people I'd like to see him play with. I think I'd be really curious about Hisoka. I think that could be super interesting if they chose to try. But that's the thing too. It's like, who are you going to get who's willing to not play with their duo? If they are willing to do a trial run with you, how many trial runs do you do? Because you can't just rely on one tournament in Warzone. That's not how that works. Maybe a double-sided bracket might be more viable if you're only going to do one tourney, because at least you get those best of 5s. It's just really hard because I hate when duos decide to call it quits after like 1 or 2 tournaments, because that's just not enough time to determine how viable you are.
Riddle me this, okay? What if we saw Mayapo hop over with UnRationaL?
That is very interesting. He is just right behind UnRationaL at 11th in those earnings. I actually don't hate that at all, but it's something that I think on paper works, but how is it going to work in practice? Because again, whatever duo UnRationaL is with, do we think that duo combined is going to be stronger than a Noob ScummN or an Almond Tommy to be able to take those wins?
Right, and you gotta have the correct play style. Like, for instance, like you mentioned, I don't think, although, let's be very clear, Huskers can absolutely destroy lobbies. I don't think Huskers UnRationaL works into 2v2, at least not as well as somebody like a ScummN and Noobs, because their play styles don't complement each other insanely well. I wonder if Mayapo could play the aggressor role and go full send on some of those maps. I don't know. I'd have to do some conjecturing. I don't mind the Z-Smith play if Aiden's not competing in a tournament, but Mayapo has been, although he's had a number of like 2v2 partners that work really well, he also has been like that perfect floater third that people filter in for a sub, or people filter in on as a third for customs. I mean, if he and Gary started grinding together, I could see it working. I don't think it'll be the comms are never going to be aggressive, but that doesn't matter. I don't know.
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, it just makes me sad. That's one of our kind of tried and true staple duos. They've been together for forever, but who knows? New Horizons. It's super understandable, because at the end of the day, you're all competing in tournaments and you're here to win. And while it might be cutthroat and not follow along with our lines of what we think is nice and polite, they're not here to be nice and polite. They're here to win. So
sure.
If Noobs puts it out there that he is a solo looking for his new duo, that is one of the hottest commodities on the market, and you don't know how long he's going to be there. So it would be remiss of someone like ScummN to not at least try it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of names that could potentially filter into that. I'll be curious to see, and who knows, maybe ScummN will kiss and make up with UnRationaL later, and they'll get back together and keep grinding tourneys. But regardless, always fun to conjecture about different teammates. Katie, we've hit all of our topics for today. I had a blast talking with both of our guests. I'm excited to do more double guest episodes and single guest episodes into the future. Is there anything else we're missing? Anything else you want to finish with before we kind of sign off?
No, I'm just going to be the annoying one who, once again, asking you all to subscribe to our YouTube. Guys, you can hit !podcast in chat, but seriously, for how small and how completely brand new the YouTube is, we've actually been getting a great amount of views on the VODs we're posting. So if you want to leave comments there, if you care to subscribe, it really, really helps us with this. We've got a lot more content outside of just specifically the podcast in the works. So any support you show us really means the world. But other than that, no, I think this has been great. Thank you so much to FoVeS again and Mazida for taking the time to come on. I think there was a lot of really rich discussion to be had there.
Yeah, thank you to everyone, all of our guests. We have a very exciting episode next week that you're not going to want to miss. It's going to be unique. It's going to be crazy. It might be a bit chaotic, but I think you'll enjoy it. I'm not going to give any leaks besides I think this will be really good for the tournament scene. You might see some names that you recognize. Multiple names, maybe many names that you recognize. So stay tuned for next episode. This has been the Bot Lobby Podcast. I'm Gojj. This is Katie. You can find me on all major socials under the name Grandmaster Gojj. Our live content is live every Wednesday. So far, still around 2 p.m. Central Time, live for about an hour and a half at twitch.tv/Grandmaster Gojj. You can find me on Twitter. I'm always casting events with my tried and true duo, Katie, who's across the scene from me. Katie, shout out your socials, and let's get out of here.
World's Bedford on Twitter. You can see him wonderfully laid out below us. And Katie Bedford on Twitch. Appreciate the follows, guys. Appreciate the support. And yeah, I really think next week should be extremely interesting. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. I don't think you guys will be expecting it, but just know that it is sorely needed.
Sorely needed indeed. Well, that's it for episode 4. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.